Evening, everyone, and welcome to Horror Historian. My name is Amanda, and tonight we are going to be discussing the 1973 and 2010 version of The Crazies. And I will admit, with some shame, that was my first time seeing the 1973 version. I had seen the 2010 version before, and I really wish that I had seen it in the proper order because it is drastically different in a lot of ways. Both these movies surround the unintentional exposure of a horrifying biological weapon created by the United States onto a small town. This biological weapon is called Trixie in both movies, but the 2010 version says it maybe once or twice, which is kind of fair. That's not exactly a terrifying code name. The original movie was heavily influenced by what was going on in Vietnam. The remake is in this awkward place of being released around 9 years after 9/11, but it isn't a movie that really figured out how to adapt the political aspect of the original movie. It's critical, but not anywhere near as critical as the original one was. I will say that the remake is much more focused on the individual. Can you tell where I'm ranking these two movies already? 5 years after his super influential and groundbreaking film, Night of the Living Dead, George A. Romero continued on his path of making horror movies that commented on the socio-political state of the world. The Crazies was released in 1973. George A. Romero wrote, directed, and edited this movie. You can see his style becoming more refined by this point. This movie is very loosely based on the screenplay The Mad People by Paul McCall? The stars are Will McMillan, Lynn Lowry, and Richard Liberty. Like most of Romero's movies, these are smaller time actors. Lynn Lowry is probably the biggest breakout star of this movie, and she continues to show up in horror movies to this day. Not great horror movies, but my point still stands. This movie unfortunately flopped. Romero blamed the lack of success on distribution, which is honestly a pretty fair assessment. Where it was viewed, people seemed to enjoy it. That being said, and I am so serious about these trigger warnings, some of them sound wild if you have only seen the 2010 version. Trigger warnings for mental illness, incest, suicide, and rape. The movie opens in the small town of Evans, Pennsylvania, and it certainly opens with a bang. A man murders his wife and sets the house on fire with the kids still inside. They watch the act in silent horror as they try to save themselves by hiding away inside the house. We then meet our main character, David. He is a firefighter that is getting urgent calls to go to the house that is on fire. Instead of immediately getting out of bed to make sure that his neighbors aren't dying, he takes some time to fool around with Judy. She is his girlfriend wife, and she is about 35 seconds pregnant. She does not look pregnant, but is occasionally brought up from time to time. The plot point is much more effective in the remake, I will say. When Judy also gets a call to come into the medical center as soon as possible, they do get up and finally do their damn jobs. The first thing that they note while they are heading to town is that there is a massive military presence. Understandably, Judy is a little freaked out when she gets to the clinic because everyone around her is wearing hazmat suits. The children are there, in critical condition, and the brother is the only one that actually survives. The clinic is giving shots to the soldiers for reasons that are still not entirely clear to me, because there is no actual vaccine for Trixie, because Trixie is a virus, and then I think they're giving them antibacterial, if I'm remembering properly. Anyway, the doctor wants Judy to take two of these alleged preventative medications and to administer them to herself and David, so that they might have a chance to not get sick like some of these people. Colonel Peckham will be the one running the show on the military side. He wants everyone that is uninfected to go to the church so that things can you can get some information out. He wants to keep things calm until they can assess the situation and kind of go from there. Already, there are concerns about the illness getting outside of the perimeter. Judy escapes from the clinic. The military sees her, but they don't really do anything to stop her. They are a bit more focused on gathering up the locals, and they are not being delicate at all. There's resistance when they go to the nightclub and start forcing people out, quite literally dragging people out of their beds. So, resistance starts to form against the soldiers. But this raises the question, are they infected by Trixie, or are they understandably freaked out due to the aggression being shown to them? The fact that you can't really tell if someone is infected feels like a commentary on Vietnam. It was impossible for the American military to know if someone was South Vietnamese or North Vietnamese. The people in this town are all being treated as though they are a danger to the soldiers. By the way, the soldiers are also at risk of being infected, so there's even more panic between the two groups. Judy and David meet up and have a debate about what they are going to do next. There is a mention of turning themselves over to the military and letting them handle things. However, the events at Kent State are brought up. This involved a peaceful protest against the Vietnam War at Kent State University in Ohio. This event led to several students being gunned down by the military. 4 students were killed and 9 were injured. So even though the military is in charge, not many people are going to feel safe with them. They do end up being picked up by the military, but they escape from it pretty quickly. There are a few people with them. One is Clank, a friend of David's, firefighter and a veteran as well. Then there is a father named Artie who is traveling with his teenage daughter, Kathy. From the beginning, it's pretty obvious that Kathy is likely infected. She's distant and seems a little out of it. They all seem to just accept that she's infected since she's not violent. No one really brings up leaving her behind. They all seem to have hope that there is a cure out there. The high school is packed after the church didn't really work out. Dr. Watts is currently using the science lab to try and find a real vaccine for Trixie. These scenes mostly have him bantering with his assistant while a lot of the people panic outside of the door. I did enjoy his assistant. She didn't get really enough credit for dealing with him. Easily my favorite character of this movie. The group finds a house being raided by some soldiers, and David wants to get some answers as to what is going on, so they attempt to take the soldiers hostage. They don't get the chance to ask a lot of questions, though. Clank makes the decision to kill all 3 soldiers when one of them reaches for a gun. It's pretty clear from his reaction that he is infected. It is interesting to me that not long after this, he talks about how important it is to him that he had been a soldier. There are a few ways to read this. One, that only someone that is infected with madness would say something like this. And 2, that the importance around his identity as a veteran is expressed through the violence he will show for the rest of the movie. That night, while they are settling into the house, there is an uncomfortable conversation from Artie about his daughter. And to my absolute shock and horror, he ends up raping her. It is unquestionable about what happened. Clank ends up finding them and drags Artie away to beat him up for what he had done. I am Team Clank on that one. It seems as though things are going to get more violent, but David makes it clear that they are going to be leaving. But they're going to be leaving Kathy behind. This is one of many reasons I can't get behind Team David and Judy in this movie. It's not unrealistic that people in this situation are going to be selfish. I just don't root for them. We don't have to worry about that, though, because Artie commits suicide. He must have been aware enough of what he did to deeply regret it. If he had been in his right mind, he never would have done it, and the whole storyline will not be in the remake. For the best, Kathy never learns of this as she is outside chasing some sheep when soldiers come across her. It is clear to us that she has been infected this entire time, but she has never been violent towards other people, just like deliriously happy with moments of panic. David and Judy are both pretty horrified by what they see, but Clank doesn't seem that affected. The remaining 3 cut through the woods when some soldiers catch their attention. They can't quite escape all 3 of them with the way that they're spread out. Clank admits that he knows he is infected. He's worried about how this infection is going to continue growing. Is he going to kill his best friend or his best friend's pregnant partner? Both are things that he doesn't want to experience. His last stand is him sniping the soldiers that are coming towards him. He's doing a pretty good job at it, until one of the soldiers shows up behind him and kills him, leaving the couple the only 2 left. A quick return to the scientist from earlier. At this point, I wondered if he was infected. He is seeing something in one of the samples that no one else is being able to pick on. His assistant is deeply confused, and he doesn't take the time to communicate anything to anyone and just bolts. He ends up being knocked over and trampled in the panic of people breaking quarantine. The sample that he got so excited about gets broken and is completely lost. The military is back to square one and trying to find a way to fight Trixie. The person that was most familiar with the chemical makeup is dead. The hope of vaccination is once again truly out of their reach. It is revealed around this point that Judy is infected. I'm not even sure when it happened. She goes from being just quiet in the background to being absolutely hysterical. David has to hide her quickly when soldiers start to investigate the barn. He kills one of the soldiers so that he can dress up as one of them. That gives him a better opportunity to take care of the rest of the soldiers. When he goes to Judy, she panics for a bit, thinking that he is a soldier. And the soldiers aren't the one that end up killing Judy, though. It's just someone that lived in the same town as them. David's knee-jerk reaction is to get revenge, but he knows deep down that none of this is their fault. These people are sick, and at this point, everyone is pretty confident that David is immune to Trixie. David never shares this information with anyone, so I guess in a way that is his revenge. Out of the group, he's the final survivor. His partner and child are dead. It's their fault that Trixie is there, and he is washing his hands of this entire situation. The military is moving to Louisville, and it seems as though symptoms of Trixie are starting to pop up there as well. At the end of the day, this movie is just fine. It's got a decent plot and the idea is mostly fleshed out. There are a few questions, but they really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. The effects are decent and the music just really works. In the defense of everyone involved, Romero liked to do things without studio involvement, so it's not going to be as polished. This movie makes the most sense in the context of when it was made, 1973. This was the year that Richard Nixon was impeached. It was 2 years before the Vietnam ended, so the entire war had already switched. People weren't supporting it as much. The 2010 movie managed to suck out all the commentary, even though there was a perfectly good recent event to really question the military and the government. The Crazies was remade 9 years after 9/11. If they wanted to continue the theme of distrusting the military and poor handling of a foreign based war, I might not complain so much about this movie. The remake was directed by Breck Eisner. The writers are Scott Kosar and Ray Wright. The stars are Timothy Oliphant, Mitchell, and Joe Anderson. Oliphant is most known to horror fans for his role in Scream 2 and the Clarita Diet. Most people know him from Deadwood or Justified. And I just want to give a special shout out to Joe Anderson, who is also in The Ruins, which is one of my favorite book adaptations to date. The movie begins 2 days before everything goes to hell. All we get is that information in a 5-second clip of a town on fire. It seems like a useless promise of things to come. They could have just started by introducing us to the characters, to be honest. Instead of taking place in Pennsylvania, they have moved to the small farming town of Ogden Marsh, Iowa. Judy is now a doctor, so a special shout out to her for that one. I just wish they did a little bit more with her character than just that update. Her being a doctor has absolutely no bearing on a plot that surrounds a biological weapon. Her assistant, Becca, wants to leave early to go watch a baseball game with her boyfriend, which Judy lets her go enjoy. It's the same baseball game that David, the town sheriff, is at. And it's a good thing that he's there, as the former town drunk comes onto the field carrying a shotgun. Rory does not put down a gun when David tells him to, and it really does seem as though he's going to open fire into the crowd. David kills him, and he very clearly feels like shit about it. Rory's wife slaps him at the morgue and is very adamant that Rory being sober, and it was something that he was incredibly proud of. She thinks that there has to be something wrong with him. When the toxicology report comes back, Rory's wife is correct. He didn't have anything to drink and there were no signs of drugs in his system. The thing with Trixie's effect in this movie is that everyone just gets violent. They go crazy angry. There is no one that is peaceful or all just floaty in their insanity, because while Clank was dangerous, Kathy was never really a threat. Although this is horrifying, Judy is still seeing her patients, and everything continues on as normal for her. There's one man named Bill who has come to the office with his family in regards to his son. Judy notices that Bill seems out of it. When he answers a question, it doesn't seem as though anyone is really home. That night, Bill proves that Judy had a good reason to be concerned about his behavior. The field cultivator is used to distract his wife out of the house while he pours gasoline inside. When she returns, her son drags her into a hiding spot to fill her in on what Bill has been doing. They are both terrified. They are even more frightened when Bill locks them inside of the room and sets the gasoline on fire. Judy and David arrive at the house, and Judy doesn't really need to be there, but she is. She starts to freak out and demand to know why Bill would do something like that. All he does is whistle and seem completely unbothered by annihilating his entire family. The next day, a few hunters discover a body attached to a parachute floating in the marsh. No one seems to have seen this happen, but a very large plane crashed into the marsh and sank underwater. The marsh happens to be where the drinking water comes from for the town. The first few places that the water goes to are Rory and Bill's houses. Mixed in with the weird things going on around town, and David goes to the mayor to demand that they turn the water off. There is something in the water and it is affecting the behavior of the citizens. The mayor refuses and says that the same drinking water is used on the fields. I'm not really sure if that's the thing that happens, but that's why they're told they can't turn off the water. David totally ignores this and turns the water off. Anyway, nothing comes from this. It's very dramatic, but it doesn't do anything. He then goes to the town morgue to talk with the coroner over what might be going on. When he gets there, he discovers the priest is in the basement with his eyes and mouth sewn shut. Yet, the man gets his mouth open enough to warn him that there is someone behind him, while his eyes are sewn shut. Before he can be sawed to death by a very infected coroner, he is saved by his deputy, Russell. Judy and David argue about what they're going to be doing next. David is super dismissive of anything that Judy has to say. She has a doctorate, and he passed whatever 6-month course was required for him to become a cop in a town of about like 500 people. They get picked up by the military and are brought down to a lockdown building. They're using temperature to separate those that are infected from those that aren't. But because Judy is pregnant, she ends up showing up as having an elevated temperature. They think that she is infected, so they tie her to a gurney and she is placed in a room with several other infected. There's no interest in trying to save them or giving them like actual medical attention. They just stuffed in a room. One of the other people in the room is Becca. We never find out why she was in that room, other when there's no sign of why she's infected. Her purpose in this movie just seems to be someone that Judy cares about. I've always liked the Panavigar sisters, so I'm not complaining about her inclusion in this movie. Ben, who is the school director, stumbles into the room carrying a pitchfork. He's already covered in blood, and we did have a little bit of a hint that this was going to go in this direction. He seemed out of it. I will say that this is probably the scariest scene in the movie. He kills one woman that is muttering to herself, and then a man that starts giggling. His attention is brought to Becca, who makes a noise. Judy screams to get his attention, which she most certainly gets. Thankfully, David and Russell save the girls. At this point, Russell voices his concerns that he might be infected, that any of them might be infected, and David assures him that there is no way that any of them are infected. They are infected. Unlike the original, you have a pretty solid lead as to how they got infected. So either these four don't drink a lot of water, are Dr. Pepper girlies, or they have the best Brita filters and out march. For now, they are traveling by foot. They are heading past Becca's boyfriend's family's farm, and she hopes that they can join their group. But when they find him, he immediately pulls a gun on them, and he is not happy to put it down, but David forces him to. They hide inside of the barn when soldiers show up to pull Scott's mother out of the house. She is apparently infected, and Scott immediately runs out to try and save her. The two of them are gunned down and set on fire. There is a lot less flamethrower magic in this movie, which is the real tragedy. The group goes to David and Judy's house. Judy goes upstairs to spend time in the nursery that her child would never use. But there are already two people inside of the room. Unlike in the first movie, there are physical signs that someone is infected. Later, when Russell is infected, we never see any of those physical signs. They really pick and choose when aspects of Trixie are going to show up. Rory's son and wife are both inside the nursery. They have visibly darkened veins and are acting erratically. They take Judy hostage until David comes upstairs, as he is a person that they actually have a problem with. David ends up stabbing the widow in the throat with the knife that had been shoved through his hand, which was kind of metal, and then Russell shoots the son from outside. When Russell comes inside, he repeatedly shoots both of the bodies. If this were a regular zombie movie, I'd be cheering them on. But there has been no sign that they need anything more than like a regular amount of trauma to kill these people. So they leave the house, but Russell is very on edge. He snaps at Becca just because she coughs. They're driving along when a government helicopter spots them. They go into what appears to be an abandoned car wash to hide, and it is absolutely not abandoned, and the car wash starts pulling the car through the building. Men start to break the glass and try to grab them to pull them out of the car. For a second, it seems as though they might actually drag Judy out, but she is rescued. They think that they're safe for a whole second when Becca is tugged out and hanged by a hose. They kill the man, but her neck was broken when she was tugged out, and she's gone. This really understandably upsets Judy. They are now without a car, as it was destroyed by the helicopter, so they follow a road by foot until they hear the sound of a car coming their way. Just one look at it tells them it's probably someone government related. David wants to get the car to stop so that they can have a ride and they can get some answers about what is going on. Russell doesn't really get that memo and uses one of those police spice traps, which causes the car to crash. At least the guy survives the crash so that it can talk to him. This is the one and only time that the biological weapon is referred to as Trixie. The plane that was supposed to take Trixie to Texas crashed while it was on its way to be destroyed. We're not entirely sure why the plane went down, but Trixie ended up being released into the water supply. And then Russell shoots the guy. At this point, the fact that Russell is infected comes to a head. He manages to get the upper hand and forces the couple to walk down the road. David and Judy feel as though they are next to each other and going through the motions of a relationship, but I don't feel it. So I'd like to give a special shout out to Joe Anderson for trying to put some heart into this movie. Russell knew that he was infected, but also seems to accept that he is a danger to the people that he cares about. So he lets David lead them and keeps his mouth shut. That evening, they come across a roadblock. Russell decides to sacrifice himself, and he is going to take all the attention so that Judy and David can escape. Russell is not doing well, and he's losing control over himself. He doesn't want to get to the point where he isn't going to have any control. I found it interesting that Russell removes the bullets from the gun before running out. He doesn't want to kill these people. It's essentially suicide by cop at that point, with the primary motivation of getting the attention on him. The government may have created Trixie in this movie, but it doesn't feel as though they've been framed as the bad guys. They may have tried to drag these families out of their homes, as well as abandoning the infected in an area that was easily attacked by other infected people. But the energy of who is the bad guy is largely put right on the infected. Russell ends up being killed, and the remaining couple walk until they reach a gas station on the edge of Ogden Marsh. They finally have the chance to get some food and drink from a water bottle, because I'm not drinking that. I'm not drinking tap water. They haven't really had the chance to slow down and relax, and they don't really get to now. They discover a pile of shell casings on the ground in front of a burnt out trailer. I'm torn between thinking it was the government due to the amount of ammo spent shooting at the trailer, or they were just extremely redneck, which there are two infected men that are using the gas station as a hunting ground. Of course there is. We're basically moving from set to set for someone to attack them. Judy is hiding in a truck, and one of the men is shooting at her while she's trying to avoid getting shot. Then, underneath the truck, which is on a lift, David is getting the shit beaten out of him by just a massive dude. Using fire, David gets the upper hand, and they manage to get the hell out of there using the truck. I don't usually notice this, but there was some really bad dubbing in this scene as well. Her mouth was just straight up not moving. As they drive away, a plane goes over them. I think it was probably a nuclear bomb was dropped on Ogden Marsh. It absolutely decimates everything that would have been left behind. The truck is close enough to get hit by the aftershock, and it ends up being thrown and totaled. They are once again without a vehicle, so they're walking their way into Cedar Rapids. The government, who is watching, determines that their arrival puts Cedar Rapids under an infection threat, despite the movie showing no sign at all of Trixie spreading from person to person. I really didn't find either movie to be that scary. I'm admittedly just here to watch people go crazy and murder each other, and to be fair, both of these movies deliver that. Maybe it's because Romero has a way of weaving commentary into his horror movies that elevated the first movie for me. He's got something to say, and while he might beat you over the head with it at times, you follow the logic. There's a little bit more heart put into the movie than the remake. I wasn't wild about either one of the main characters, but at least the remake had a few side characters that were a little bit more worth getting invested in. Of course, the special effects were better in the remake, not that it was utilized as much as it could have been, and honestly, the original just gets credit for the flamethrowers. I'll give 3 stars to the original and probably like 2.5 for the remake. They're both entertaining. The original may have created a version of the Rage virus, but it's been done better by other movies, and then the remake had better movies in recent memory and still didn't do the Rage virus what it could have been. I am under no impression that I am surviving either one of these movies. Like, I may be lucky enough for the first one, maybe, because it seems like there's some people that survive without, like David is immune. I'm not saying I'm going to be immune. I'm just saying that there's a chance. The second one, I'm toast. I'm going to get murdered very quickly. Yep. Because there's no happy, like, deliriously happy people in that one. Like, they're not crazy happy. They're just crazy, 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 crazy murder. And I'm in trouble in that one.